you, and welcome to the Africa for Palestine webinar series. The series has been running since, I believe, July of last year. We've had many tremendous guests. Today we have on Zulaikha Patel. We're very honored to have her and let her share her story of her activism and get inspired to do more ourselves. Thank you for joining us, Zulaikha. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm well, thank you. I think I'm surviving during the pandemic. How are you?
Doing all right, pretty much the same. Just trying to get through like everybody else. So I wanted to start out just, I read up a lot on your story and I was very, very impressed. I just wanted to kind of have you talk about that, how you got involved in activism.
One of the things for me that led to me being involved was I read a lot growing up. I still read a lot. And so through reading, I was exposed to a lot of social injustices. I read a lot of novels particularly about the transition from apartheid to our current democracy. And those were the books that really started to get me thinking a lot about the state of South Africa, in terms of the state of the country and the state of our economy, as well as just the state of the population as a whole. And so through reading a lot of those novels, and I read a lot of feminist novels growing up, and so it it really started to spark a lot of my thinking. And through sparking a lot of my thinking, it made me question a lot about the world that we live in and the state of the world. And also, there was a particular time when I then decided to, I think that for me, that time during around 2014, I was 12. And that for me was the time when I would say is my earliest activist memory, because around that time, I started to engage a lot with my identity. And I started to also then engage a lot in terms of the state of South Africa racially. And that was after having gone through a lot of racist experiences through school and just outside of school as well. And so when I was 12, I decided to go natural. I stopped straightening my hair. I stopped basically putting any chemicals into my hair, and I started to reject the Eurocentric beauty standard. And that for me was when I that's my earliest activist memory. The minute I started to reject the Eurocentric beauty standard, and that then propelled me to rejecting Eurocentrism in a lot of other spaces other than my physical appearance. It made me reject Eurocentrism in the space of education. I then began to question, why is it that in the 21st century we still have children being taught Shakespeare and Shakespeare's dramas when there's so many African novelists, African playwrights, and African authors who would be of more importance to learn about, especially because they would be relatable to from an African perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it emphasizes how deeply white supremacy penetrates our racist societies, right? Down to, you have obviously at every level, from the how we're educated, what we teach people, something as important as that, to as deep as just someone's appearance, the standards that we put on people. I mean, it's really fascinating. And I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about, that why, in your view, culture and self-expression is so pivotal and so important when correcting racial injustices in our society?
I really, really like that question because it then takes me back to my first activism memory, which is very closely tied to self-expression. And in understanding why it's so pivotal, you have to understand what were the what what were the most subtle things that colonialism enforced. And through that, through colonialism, it deprived us of our cultural expression, and it also policed identity, and it also took away our humanness, because in policing one's identity, you take away how they identify, you take away their humanness, you take away them viewing themselves as human. And colonialism also positioned African identity as abnormal as opposed to whiteness. And so self-expression is so pivotal in when it comes to addressing racial inequality, because as a result of racial inequality is as a result of colonization, because that's where it began. And colonization took away the right to expression, cultural expression, and policed our identities, and also positioned our identities as abnormal as opposed to whiteness. And it made whiteness the standard. When you think of whiteness, it made being blonde and blue-eyed the standard. And so race and so self-expression then becomes so important, because then it allows you to take back the power in your identity, and it pushes you to then view yourself as human, and it brings back your humanity.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It reminds me a lot of, I mean, other struggles worldwide. I think under any oppressive system, it relies on the underclass or the group that's positioned lower socially in society to feel humiliated. I mean, that's really how these unjust hierarchical power structures are upheld, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I wanted to ask kind of, you've been involved for so long, even as such a young woman. I wanted to know kind of what you're doing at the moment. Where has your activist journey led you at this moment? And what's important? What are you pushing for now?
I began basically in the space of anti-racism, um and and that for me has always been something that's very, very, very close to my heart, because it's something that I have experienced. I've experienced racism, and so that's why it became so important to me. And that then led me to decolonization, and also advocating for decolonization as um, as a way forward. Because when you think of racism and you start to think of abolishing racist systems, as well as racist laws and policies that work against marginalized people, then you then have to ask yourself, then what comes next? Once you've abolished a particular thing, what do you then do? And then you're forced to recreate something that works for all. And so I then began to view decolonization as not just a principle to live by, but then as a solution, and also as a tool to dismantle racism.
Yeah.
Because when you think of decolonization, you think it's essentially breaking down colonization, and it's in the term decolonization. And so I've lately I've been doing a lot of work on decolonization, especially decolonized education, because I believe that that's where one of our biggest global problems is that white supremacy is so deeply embedded, to a point whereby it's in our education, it's in the way our education system operates globally. And so I've been over the past 2 years, I've been really drawn to a lot of decolonization work, and I've been using that primarily as a tool to dismantle racism, as also and also as a solution, And I know that in this question that you also asked what guides my quest for justice. And for me, it's really always been one thing that's guided me, that you have to view injustice as the man-made thing that it is, because it is man-made. And anything that is man-made, anything that is man-made has a solution to it and can be deconstructed and abolished, anything that is man-made. And I think a lot of the times we don't view a lot of our social injustices as man-made issues, which they essentially are. And anything that is man-made has a solution to it and can be deconstructed.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's really at the core of not just a society that is so where racism is so embedded and patriarchy is so embedded. Those concepts are, I mean, they're based off of just complete fabrications that haven't been, haven't necessarily been around for all of humanity. These are assertions that that there are characteristics tied to the way someone physically looks, the way they speak. It's a complete lie to hold up the most powerful people in society. That's really all it is. I wanted to move to why, in your view, at this moment, it seems like so many young people are getting involved in activism, in trying to change the world around them. I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on why right now? Why do you think that this moment, so many people are attaching themselves, so many young people are attaching themselves to social causes?
I think that globally, in this moment that we're in, there's been a global consciousness of young people in us realizing our collective power as a majority, as a global majority, because young people are in the majority, make up majority of the global population. And so I think that right now, in this current moment that the world finds itself in, we have realized our collective power and what that could do for the world when we do come together. And also, one thing that I could say is that I think that this current moment has made young people realize that we 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 carry a lot of solutions in us. Many times we think that those aren't solutions, but we carry a lot of solutions in us to a lot of the world's problems. And so I think that that's also it's created this passion in young people to want to get involved in a lot of social justice causes, because last year, with a lot of the social justice movements last year, particularly End SARS and Black Lives Matter, those were primarily led by young people under the age of 35.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, and again, I think it's interesting, you keep bringing up like the global aspect of it. Obviously I'm American, you're South African. So many of, so much of the solutions to our society's problems are in parallel. Obviously, we have distinct issues in our societies, but I think that it's because we've both had these extreme systems of racial and economic inequality, right? That creates these very extreme disparities in society. I wanted to kind of ask you, about solidarity. Obviously that's in the title of today's event. What does solidarity mean to you? And why is solidarity, and more specifically, international solidarity so important to your work and so important to our activist spaces right now?
Solidarity is it's very important, and what that means to me and how I've always understood solidarity is us collectively working towards a particular goal, and us collectively striving for that goal. And I've always been under the belief that nothing nothing can be done alone, and we need to unite as a collective of people. So I've always been under the belief that nothing can be done alone, and solidarity for me has always meant that us collectively uniting to work towards a particular goal and strive for that goal. And international solidarity is very, very important in our activism, because what that helps with is, it helps with us reaching the goal that we want to reach when we're united as a collective. Because I'm going to make an example of apartheid, right, in South Africa. South Africa and the United States, both at the time, Black people in South Africa and Black people in the United States were separated by an ocean, but united in experiencing the very same injustice. And so through the solidarity that was shown at the time, Americans Americans striving towards the same goal to end apartheid, it applied more pressure on the particular issue at hand, being apartheid, to end, which led to a much sooner ending, as well as also raised awareness globally. Because international solidarity, it also brings about raising awareness on a particular injustice. And so with apartheid, Black Americans and Black South Africans were separated by an ocean, but united in experiencing the very same injustice. And so that led to applying more pressure, and the solidarity from the Black Americans led to applying pressure on the apartheid government, as well as led to creating an awareness around the brutalities being experienced in South Africa at the time globally.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's also like the two, right? We're responding to again, like I said before, like similar disparities in our societies, but also much like the slave trade, the upholding of these institutions is done for the purpose of creating capital for wealthy people. Like the investment firms in the United States upholding apartheid in South Africa so that the mining industry could have a cheap labor force. I mean, I think that's what is so important about international solidarity. We're all so connected. Our oppression is connected ocean between, even with the ocean separating us, like you said, we're all
We're
so
all very connected in our oppression, especially with now currently in the world we find ourselves in now. We're all connected through experiencing one economic injustice from a particular economic system, being capitalism. We're all united in that in experiencing that injustice. Like, for example, unemployment is primarily caused by capitalism. I don't think there's another explanation to unemployment. And one thing that it unites us globally, because we all experience capitalism. I don't think there's anyone that can say, other than capitalists themselves, I don't think that there's any other person that has benefited in a good way off capitalism, because that is the very same system that allows for billionaires to exist, for someone to have been able to generate more billions in the midst of a pandemic, whilst companies have been shutting down, people have been retrenched, but others have been able to generate more capital in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. I know, and that's the whole experience with the global pandemic has really ripped the face off of these capitalist corporations. You know, it shows bare bones that the existence of these massive pockets of wealth relies on the exploitation of the most vulnerable people in the world. And it's just morally reprehensible. It's really the only
Absolutely.
way I can describe it. And, you know, we're kind of talking about, you know, these challenges that young people are experiencing right now. I want to kind of ask, like, what are the three major, you know, obviously taking into consideration this economics that we're talking about, what are the three biggest challenges that young people are facing today?
The biggest challenges for me that I'd say young people are facing currently: number one, unemployment; number two, access to free quality education, and actually access to free quality decolonized education that is more specific; and number three, this one is one that I think that you and I would both relate to. Number three is that young people are facing the challenge with having a space in governance. A lot of governments across the world are very exclusionary on young people having a seat in governance. Yeah, because currently, one thing that I would say about the world currently is that young people are having their futures dictated to them, and what their futures are going to look like. They're having their futures decided on by a generation that's not going to be a part of their futures. And so the third challenge, having a place in governance, is quite a big challenge, because a lot of the injustices we continue to face are as a result of bad governance, and government not taking those challenges and the issues being brought forward by the people seriously. And young people, and particularly with unemployment, a lot of young people are facing current challenges because they don't even have a space to voice their opinions on those challenges. And not just only be, one thing that I always say is that young people's place in society cannot only be in the streets protesting, but we also have to have a say on policies, and the changes in policies and the drawing up of new policies. And we have to have a say in those policies. And the only way to have a say is when you have a seat in the space of governance. And that's a very big challenge, because globally, a lot of governments are still exclude young people.
Absolutely. And especially because young people are the most impacted by these policies, it seems kind of insane that that we don't get a seat at the table, right? So wrapping up, this is going to be the final question for today. Kind of back to the beginning, more of the cultural side of things. How do young people interface, in your opinion, with the concept of Black consciousness today?
You know, you have to understand the concept of Black consciousness. And what the concept of Black consciousness was that it stated that political freedom means nothing without mental liberation. And how, as young people, we interface with that is that we are currently in a state where we've gained political freedom, particularly in South Africa's case. In South Africa's case, we've gained political freedom. We have the right to vote. Every citizen has the right to vote. However, we do not have economic freedom. South Africa's economy still is largely in the hands of white men. And so the majority of South Africa's people don't have access to the economy. And further on that, another one of South Africa's biggest struggles is mental liberation. And how we as young people can interface with the concept of Black consciousness is through understanding what our struggle is today, because one thing that I believe is that every generation has its own struggle. And when I say every generation has its own particular struggle to wage, is that we shouldn't necessarily just view ourselves as descendants, but rather as ascendants, those who ascend from those who have walked before us. And we as young people are the ascendants of the generation of the Chris Hatneys, the Thomas Sankaras, and the people who fought for the right to us, who fought for the right for us to gain the right to vote, being political freedom. And so we are the ascendants of the generation that fought for the right to vote and fought for political freedom. And so as we ascend, we have to take on the struggle, that our struggle currently now is how do we then begin to liberate ourselves economically? That's our struggle. And also we have the identity struggle. We face the identity struggle, and the identity struggle is closely tied to mental emancipation and mental liberation. And so we as young people can interface with the concept of Black consciousness through us understanding what our struggle is. And our struggle now is primarily an identity struggle and also an economic struggle.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's so important to tell stories to young people, you know, of the people who walked before us, right? Because our exploitation as young people relies on us not understanding our history as people, right? I kind of wanted to ask three people who are inspiring to you personally.
Three people. I am inspired by a lot of people, but my top three revolutionaries that I look to these people whenever, regardless, whenever I feel down or whether I'm at my best, but I look to these people and I find strength in their legacies. Definitely Dr. Angela Davis, Mam Winnie Madikizela Mandela, as well as Thomas Sankara.
Yeah, Sankara is a personal favorite of mine, and I was told you met Angela Davis. Is that correct?
Yes. In 2016, when I was 13, I met her, and I don't even have the right words for that moment. It was just it was so beautiful to just be in her presence and also learn from her and also engage with her on a lot of her views on the issues that we currently face. And I don't even have the perfect words to describe that moment, but it definitely, that day I met her is definitely on the list of one of the best days of my life.
She's so incredible, and it's so amazing to still have her around, right? To give her voice to the current situation, as so many revolutionaries have been, you know, unfortunately killed or imprisoned or excommunicated from society in a lot of ways because their views are too radical or whitewashed, and
Yeah.
their messages become de-radicalized. Uh, Finally, I just wanted to get your, I wanted to ask you if you have a message for the youth of Palestine. You know, this is a population that is experiencing this massive injustice, much like in the case of apartheid and in the United States with our racial injustice. This is a young people who are angry, you know, who feel that their society is doing everything to make sure that they don't have a future. I just wanted to know what if you could say something to the youth of Palestine, what would that be?
Number one, it would be that we stand with you for as long as until you've gained your liberation. We will continue to stand with you, because for as long as you are not free from that injustice, from the injustice of apartheid, then we are not free. For as long as one person in the world experiences injustice, particularly a injustice closely linked to racism, and injustice of if any person in the world, a single person experiences inequality and injustice, then we are not free as the collective global population. And we stand with you for as long as you are still experiencing this injustice. And secondly, one thing that I would say to the youth of Palestine is that it is in their hands, and there's so much power that lies in their hands, and they're the only ones who are going to change their current state. And one thing that I would say is that your resistance is never in vain, and it will never be in vain. And you are the only ones as youth that can change what your future will look like. And so one thing that I would say is don't lose hope, and don't give up. And we stand with you, and it is in your hands as young people, and there's so much power in young people's hands. And one thing that I would say, on the days where you do feel like you're losing hope, one thing that I would say is that you have to remember that you cannot have your future determined by those who will not be part of it. And as young people, particularly two young people, that would mean that we have to fight for us to determine our own future, and fight for us to have a position in governance, and fight for ourselves, essentially, because if we don't, then no one is going to do it for us. And I don't lose hope at all, and we stand with you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Zulaikha, for joining us. This has been a really awesome conversation. I just want to encourage everyone to like and share this video as widely as possible. I think this is such an important conversation to be having right now. Banding together as young people around the world, as vulnerable people, frankly, at a time when capitalism is alienating people from one another. We have to fight against it. There's no other option for us when capital is decimating our environment, and literally making the future of our species something that's uncertain. It really blows my mind. Again, thank you so much, Zulaikha, and yeah, thank you for watching.
Thank you for having me. It was an absolute honor. Thank you for having me.